started like any other Saturday in the quiet town of Ashwood, Oregon. A light fog crept over the tree-lined streets, the scent of fresh coffee and damp pine lingering in the air. The town square bustled with weekend shoppers, couples strolled through the local farmers market, and kids raced their bikes down the sidewalk. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But by nightfall, everything had changed. Emily Carter, a 25-year-old investigative journalist, had vanished without a trace. At 6:42 p.m., a security camera outside Ashwood Public Library captured the last known footage of her. She exited the building, her satchel slung over her shoulder, her pace quick but not hurried. She clutched her car keys in one hand, occasionally glancing over her shoulder. Had she felt something then? A prickle of unease? A presence lurking in the shadows? Her navy mule Honda Civic sat parked beneath a flickering street lamp, untouched. Her phone, found in the front seat, displayed an unsent message to her best friend, Claire Monroe. "Something feels off. I think I'm being The message stopped mid-sentence. Sheriff Daniel Briggs stood beside Emily's car, his brows furrowed. "This doesn't look like someone who just took off," he muttered, scanning the dimly lit lot. The car was locked, the engine cold. No signs of a struggle, no shattered glass. It was as if she had simply stepped into the void. He turned to the officer beside him. "Check the security footage from the surrounding buildings. Someone must have seen something." But the deeper they dug, the more unsettling the case became. A witness, an elderly woman who had just exited the library minutes before Emily, recalled hearing a brief, sharp cry followed by the screech of tires. She had dismissed it as a reckless driver until now. As the town of Ashwood tucked itself into bed that night, an unshakable fear settled over its people. Emily Carter was gone, and the question on everyone's lips was the same. Had she left willingly, or was something much darker at play? By Monday morning, the town of Ashwood was gripped with fear. Missing person flyers with Emily Carter's face were plastered across shop windows, telephone poles, and gas stations. The once quiet town square buzzed with hushed conversations, speculations, theories, and whispered fears. Sheriff Daniel Briggs sat at his desk, rubbing his temples. He had seen disappearances before, but this felt different. Emily wasn't the type to vanish without a reason. She was methodical, sharp, always in control. Something, or someone, had taken that control away from her. The FBI's arrival signaled the case's severity. Special Agent Mark Calloway, known for solving high-profile abductions, stepped into the sheriff's office, his presence commanding immediate attention. He placed a thin manila folder on the desk and met Briggs's gaze. "She was working on an investigation before she disappeared," Calloway stated. "What do you know about it?" Briggs exhaled. "Emily was looking into local corruption, city contracts, missing funds. She'd ruffled some feathers, but I never thought it was dangerous." Calloway slid a document across the desk. It was a list of names, prominent business owners, city officials, including Victor Langston, one of Ashwood's most powerful figures. "That's what she was investigating?" Briggs asked. Calloway nodded. "And now she's missing." Meanwhile, Claire Monroe sat in the sheriff's office, her fingers wrapped tightly around a styrofoam cup of coffee. Her hands shook as she spoke. "Emily told me she was close to something big," she whispered. "She said she was being followed." Briggs leaned forward. "Did she say who?" Claire shook her head. "No, just that she felt like someone was watching her, no matter where she went." The team reviewed the surveillance footage from the library. A detail they had missed before now stood out. A black SUV parked across the street. It had been there for over an hour. When Emily stepped out of the library, the SUV's brake lights flickered on. The vehicle pulled away from the curb, slowly following her into the darkness. Briggs clenched his jaw. "We need to find that car." The hunt for Emily Carter had officially begun. The deeper they dug into Emily Carter's disappearance, the more unsettling the case became. The black SUV seen on surveillance had no license plate visible, making it difficult to trace. No witnesses had noticed anything suspicious, and there were no signs of forced entry into her car. It was as if she had simply walked into the abyss. But Sheriff Briggs and Agent Calloway knew better. This was no random disappearance. Emily had been on to something. Briggs flipped through her research notes, retrieved from her apartment. They were filled with scribbled names, transaction records, and bold, underlined phrases. Funds missing. $2 M. Langston connection. Who else is involved? Then, a break in the case. A retired dock worker, Robert Hayes, came forward, claiming he had seen something unusual on the night Emily vanished. I was walking my dog near the old mill, Hayes explained, shifting uncomfortably. It's about 2 blocks from the library. I heard a woman yell, not like she was talking, like she was scared. Then I saw that black SUV speed past. Calloway pressed. Did you see who was inside? Hayes shook his head. Too dark. But there were 2 people up front. The driver had a baseball cap pulled low. Did the SUV head out of town? Briggs asked. No. It turned onto Route 6, toward the industrial district. That was enough to send them searching. The industrial district was home to old factories, abandoned storage units, and the ruins of Ashwood's once thriving lumber industry. If someone wanted to keep Emily hidden, that would be the place to do it. As they combed through traffic cameras, Calloway's phone buzzed. The forensics team had finished analyzing Emily's belongings. Her satchel, found inside her locked car, had been wiped clean. No fingerprints, no DNA. But inside, tucked into a hidden pocket, was a torn piece of paper with a single name scrawled on it. Victor Langston, the same man she had been investigating, the same man whose influence spread through Ashwood like a disease. Briggs exchanged a look with Calloway. We need to bring Langston in for questioning. But before they could, the case took a chilling turn. Langston was found dead in his home. A single gunshot wound to the head. A note on his desk read, I had no choice. The truth behind Emily's disappearance had just become even darker. The town of Ashwood was still reeling from Victor Langston's sudden death. His apparent suicide raised more questions than answers. Was he truly responsible for Emily's disappearance, or had someone silenced him before he could talk? Sheriff Briggs and Agent Calloway weren't convinced Langston had acted alone, if he was involved at all. And then, just when the trail seemed to be growing cold, a shocking discovery reignited the investigation. A jogger running along the wooded trails near Lake Hollow stumbled upon something disturbing. Buried beneath damp leaves and twigs was a satchel. Emily's satchel. The jogger immediately called the police. Briggs and Calloway arrived at the scene, their stomachs twisting as they examined the bag. It was torn, the leather scraped, as if it had been tossed or dragged. Inside, Emily's notebook was still there, but several pages were missing. One page stood out. A single name was scrawled repeatedly in Emily's hurried handwriting. Victor Langston. That's 2 connections to Langston, Briggs muttered. But he's dead. If he was responsible, where's Emily? Calloway flipped through the remaining pages of the notebook. Most of the writing was research. Financial records, connections between the mayor's office and illegal offshore accounts. But one entry stood out. Meeting tonight. He says he has proof. Finally, the missing piece. Briggs narrowed his eyes. Meeting with who? Before they could speculate, a forensic officer approached with a grim expression. We found something else. A few yards away, partially buried in the dirt near a rotting log, was a cell phone. It was cracked, the screen spiderwebbed, but still intact. It wasn't Emily's. They rushed it to the lab, hoping to extract any useful data. While waiting, Calloway made a call to Langston's former business partners. I don't think Langston was working alone, he said. I think someone wanted him out of the picture just as badly as they wanted Emily gone. Hours later, the results came in. The phone belonged to Deputy Frank Miller, one of Briggs's own men. Briggs felt his blood turn cold. If Miller's involved, we need to move fast. Because if Emily was still alive, time was running out. The discovery of Deputy Frank Miller's phone sent a shockwave through the investigation. Sheriff Briggs had worked with Miller for over a decade. He was a trusted officer, someone who had been involved in Emily's case from the start. If Miller was connected, then this case had just taken a dangerous turn. Briggs and Calloway wasted no time. They brought Miller in for questioning, but the deputy was calm. Too calm. "You really think I had something to do with Emily Carter?" he scoffed, leaning back in the interrogation chair. "You've got nothing." Briggs studied him, his jaw clenched. "Then explain why your phone was found buried in the woods next to Emily's satchel." For the first time, Miller hesitated. A flicker of something. Fear? Guilt? He exhaled sharply. "I lost it a week ago. Had no idea where it went." Calloway leaned forward. "That's a damn coincidence, don't you think? You lose your phone, and it just happens to end up at what could be a crime scene?" Miller's composure cracked. His hands clenched into fists. "I didn't take her." "Then who did?" Briggs demanded. Silence. Miller glanced at the one-way mirror, as if expecting someone to be watching. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't know how deep this goes. Langston was just the beginning." Before Briggs or Calloway could press further, Miller shut down, demanding a lawyer. That night, the case took another chilling turn. Claire Monroe, Emily's best friend, received an anonymous email with no subject line. The message contained a single video attachment. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. The footage was grainy, dimly lit by a single flickering light bulb. Emily was there, alive. Her hands were tied behind her back, her mouth covered with tape. She sat in a metal chair, shaking, her eyes wide with terror. A deep, distorted voice spoke from off-screen. She included, "Ask too many questions, stop looking or she disappears for good." Claire's hands trembled as she forwarded the email to Briggs and Calloway. "She's alive," she whispered, "but for how much longer?" The video had metadata attached. It had been uploaded from an IP address connected to an old warehouse outside town. Briggs grabbed his coat. "We're going in, now." Sheriff Briggs and Agent Calloway wasted no time. The moment Claire forwarded the video, they traced the IP address to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Ashwood. The location made sense, isolated, forgotten, the perfect place to keep someone hidden. Briggs gathered a team, loading up in unmarked SUVs. Time was slipping away. If Emily was still alive, they had to move fast. As they neared the warehouse, the tension in the car was thick. Calloway double-checked his weapon. "We go in silent," he said. "No lights, no sirens. We don't want them running before we get there." Briggs nodded. "We get Emily out first. Then we take them down." The warehouse loomed in the darkness, its rusted metal walls covered in graffiti. A single light flickered near the entrance. The team moved in, their footsteps quiet against the dirt and gravel. Inside, the air was thick with dust and dampness. Stacked crates and old machinery cast eerie shadows. And then, a muffled sound. Briggs signaled for silence. He followed the noise, weaving through the debris until he spotted a door at the far end of the warehouse. He pressed his ear against it. Shallow breathing, a weak whimper. "Emily." Briggs raised 3 fingers. Countdown. 3, 2, 1. The door burst open. Emily sat in the center of the room, bound to a chair, her face pale and streaked with dirt. Her eyes widened as she saw them. Behind her, 2 men in dark clothing reached for their weapons. Calloway fired first. 1 man dropped. The second bolted for the back exit, but Briggs tackled him to the ground, pinning him. "You're not going anywhere," he growled. Claire rushed in behind them, her eyes welling up as she untied Emily's restraints. "You're okay," she whispered, her hands shaking. "We've got you." Emily's voice was weak but determined. "They weren't working alone," she managed. "There's more." The realization sent a chill through Briggs. The case wasn't over. This was just the beginning. As the team led Emily outside, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. She was safe. For now. But the dark forces behind her abduction were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until their secrets were buried for good. The fight wasn't over.